What's up, everyone? Happy Friday, and welcome to the game on Pax8 Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We've got a Power Pack show this week. This is our last show before Beyond, Pax8 Beyond, kicking off in 2 days on Sunday. We're excited to see you there. Later on, we're going to be joined by two special guests, John Murchison, CEO of Blackpoint, and one special guest we'll save for when we actually roll in. Let's jump straight into the news.
Man,
All right,
Dom.
I gotta warn everyone too that the storm that was supposed to roll in an hour is it's coming right now. So we'll see how this. I have another lightning episode.
What is it with you trying to murder our show with a storm, Dom? It feels like you've planned this in some form or
This is
fashion.
not Colorado weather. I don't know what's going on.
Man, I'll tell you, we're what, 2 days from Beyond kicking off? 3
Days.
days from Beyond? Like, it's nuts. It's getting crazy. So I'm super excited. I'll tell you, we have a massive, massive news list. I know you all have been watching the cyber news lately, so none of this should be a surprise to you, but we grabbed a few of them that were the biggest to talk about. Let's go ahead and look at this first one. I was shocked by this morning because I think this is probably one of the largest sales tools I've ever seen in my life is this conversation of saying, hey, listen, if you had a Barracuda that was compromised, you cannot just patch it. You cannot fix it. You must replace it, which means that they've gotten such a low level hook from a root perspective or capabilities there to come back in that you're not getting them out, right? There is no firmware patch that's going to fix it. It would probably be a complete re-OS setup, right? And so they're saying replace it. Dom, have you ever heard of this before? I cannot in recent memory think of a time where someone said, you've got to just burn this device, essentially.
I mean, no, I have burned devices. That has been a thing I
Sure.
have done more so
It's
out of
fair.
an abundance. But I've never seen a manufacturer be like, "Yeah, this is trash." Like that is indeed a new one. It's got to be a rootkit or some sort of vulnerability in the chipset. Because if a format doesn't fix it, it's obviously pretty deep. And I don't know. We'll see what comes out of this. I would expect CUDA to do some sort of RMA process for affected client. I don't know. This is a new one. This is uncharted territory for sure.
You know what's really rough about this? Excuse me, y'all. Is the timeline on this. And I think several of the stories are going to follow a similar thematic aspect today, and whether it was intentional or otherwise. This was first noticed in May. The CVE was CVE 2023-2868, and it was first noticed, but they determined that this access has been happening since October, right? That this has been going on, and potentially people have had this access in your email server, presumably right there on the edge with access to and line of sight to your mail server inside the environment, if that's the case. And having that ability for almost 7-8 months now that we're in, that's terrifying from that perspective. And I think we're going to see a couple of these things play out, and I think that's where
speaks to good architecture too, though. I would point out that the Barracuda should not be, or whatever email, if you're still using physical email appliances, it shouldn't be on the same network as the mail server.
Sure.
It should be on a separate network. Probably wouldn't go so far as to call it DMZ because it needs some line of sight, but it needs limited line of sight to that Exchange server. If it's communicating to Exchange on port 25, it should only have port 25, right? And that's going to limit that exposure should that email appliance be compromised.
Now, not even getting into the conversation that means you probably likely have an Exchange server today that you're managing, because never seen any Exchange level vulnerabilities. There's never been any major supply chain challenges with Exchange, right? Like, oh, no, there's been tons and tons and tons of them. That's right. It's probably unconscionable to have an Exchange server at this point. Let's go ahead and look at the next article, if you will. Don, what do we have here, buddy?
This one comes from The Record. Love these guys. It's a great source. So definitely worth a bookmark. But it's right there in the headline: Caribbean island Martinique dealing with Cyberattack. If you're familiar with these Caribbean islands, particularly ones like Martinique, they're small, right? This one has population about 360,000. It's a French territory. Not a lot of people, which means not a lot of government assets. But I think, if we compare this back all the way back to like Dallas, there's enough people in the populace that there's probably a significant amount of PII at play here. So this is sort of yet another attack against a government entity of the ransomware variety. And it's pretty new, so there's not a ton. But
I haven't seen this one before.
The government is struggling along.
Ricida. Yeah, Ricida ransomware gang is not one I'm familiar with either. But
think
if
I've
you
heard
think
them
about the
once,
impact of
but nothing
an
major
entire
though.
government systems being compromised from that perspective, you're definitely right on having PII information about that person potentially, and it's kind of the same thing of the incident response, the planning ahead of time, the limiting of the attack surface, the limiting of the blast radius of things, is just over and over again shown as not necessarily in play, right? And it's just always going on forever.
Even
and
more
ever.
so government, which is kind of terrifying. I think, if anyone is going to be good at that, you'd want it to be your government. But hey,
You would think. Now I realize as we say it that way, we're pointing like this many fingers back at ourselves in the
yes,
sense
for
that we've
sure.
had several of our government agencies also be compromised. We can't have a show without having some buzzword and AI being used in it. But we have a next article here that was an interesting read about researchers talking about creating polymorphic malware by using ChatGPT instances or GPT instances themselves to do that. Did you happen to read much on this article? Because it was quite interesting. They were essentially having a C squared that if you reached out to that command and control, C squared, sorry, command and control for the acronyms there. But reach out to that command and control network, and each time you came out, it would be a new fingerprint. It would be a different set of code that might be generated in that to change that code and help it evade analysis. And I would imagine it takes a pretty awesome team to catch that kind of stuff. But I don't think this is anything novel. I think it is because there's a lot of polymorphic malware. I think what it does is it lowers the effort necessarily to do something like this, although it was already a pretty low barrier to do in the past. I suppose
polymorphic malware is a classic reason we don't want to use signatures anymore, right?
Sure.
But I will say it's important to remember ChatGPT is trained on historical data to a point in time. So if it's writing code, it's very likely using known code of some sort or compiling, samples from known code to generate that. So while this is probably hard to detect, I do think some of the TTPs that come out of malware like this will be relatively detectable just because of similar behavior to previously polymorphic samples. Right?
And I think the other thing to call out here is EDR, endpoint detection and response, right? It's there to find, gather data, gather the information, detect and respond where it can on its own native basis. But at the end of the day, you still need alternate sources and other things brought into the mix, right? You need to enrich your EDR data with other data, other information about the network layer, other things that are happening in the environment, lateralization attempts, other behaviors, right? And to your point, the EDRs do a good job of detecting those behaviors. But at the end of the day, a reverse HTTPS session is a reverse HTTPS session. It's definitely happening all the time in other common places. And so it is interesting
like
when you start thinking about this. Yeah, it's an RMM. Exactly. We're going to talk about that. In fact, Dom, I think you may have literally set us up for this one. So why don't you take this next article?
Yeah, this should be a quick one. Basically, the MSISAC came out with some extremely helpful information around the concepts of securing remote access Trojans. Remote access software. In terms of just really good guidance to follow, it's really good general guidance, and I think it really helps you drill down if you're deploying this. But I want to point out my favorite part of this entire document, that they actually push out suggestions, one for MSPs, but two for people that write remote access software. Right? There's actual guidance that's good in there for developers remote access software. So it's a really good asset. Links in the description. I'd encourage you to check it out.
What's great about that is you're seeing, and maybe this is coincidental, but you're seeing work towards secure by design and secure by default, right? You're starting to see that where you're saying, hey, listen, if you're going to make remote access software, here's some guidelines you ought to follow to be more secure by design. Here's some things you should think about to be better and more secure by default, right? And you're starting to see that come out. One thing you missed, Dom, was MSISAC stands for Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And we did miss that acronym, so I wanted to go ahead and add that in as well. But the point is, when you're thinking about this, you're always on remote access software. I would come out and say it is probably not the right method anymore. I think we did that for convenience significantly over efficacy. And it was all for one reason, right, Dom? It was to say, I don't want my user who's who's going to have trouble connecting, to have to type in the box, and it's going to add an extra 2 minutes per call. Because I was, no, Sally, click, ma'am, would you please click, no, the top bar. Yeah, and then you're going to type, no, the code, access code, type the access code. That was some of that challenge. I think that's been solved in other ways. You can have some more JIT-GIA type methodologies that exist for those remote access. A great example of that is, Microsoft has recently built into Intune, in their Intune premium SKUs, the ability to do remote connection, and it's built into the OS, and it can be triggered in ways that's much more meaningful. So I think that these type of things, when you're getting into remote access software, as just a takeaway is, yes, it needs to be more secure. Yes, we should secure it as well. But it should also be something that we look to minimize that always on, always access to assets. And I think that that's something, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but that would be my advice for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we got rid of persistent on workstations, at least. It didn't add much. Like modern software is just not hard to do that with. It walks the user through,
Right.
type in the numbers here that we gave you, click here to do the thing. It's not as hard to use as it used to be, right? Even some of the older dinosaur products like a LogMe and Rescue has really gotten to a point where it's user friendly. So I would argue like you probably do not need persistent remote access to workstations, and I'd rather not have it. I refuse to sneak on someone's workstation for a manager or something like that anyways. So just having that interactive support session, if it's not connected to the internet, none of that matters anyways, right? So
Yeah.
I would lean on ad hoc remote sessions wherever I could.
I agree. And it's always nice seeing things come out from MSISAC about some of this stuff to help people understand how important it is that we deal with these. This last one, you have to have been living under a rock if you haven't heard about this one yet. And I think this is going to be another one of our SolarWinds type models as time goes on, of just how many people have been compromised by this. But this MOVEit vulnerability, Dom, you kind of brought this up. We started talking about this last week. And we now have Blackpoint Cyber wrote out an article on this, updating this. Kind of help me out with what people need to know about MOVEit from a vulnerability perspective.
This is a high severity vulnerability. Is the first point I would drive home. And if you are using the software, stop what you're doing and make sure you've patched it. This is a significant one. It allows for data exfiltration, a lot of intelligence gathering, and it's widely exploited at this point. This article here is a fantastic analysis out of the Blackpoint team on what exactly some of these exploits are doing. So I would really expect anyone who's managing this to already have patched it. This is not a new one, but it keeps evolving. There's talk of maybe perhaps more vulnerabilities being linked to this. So this is a big one. I don't know that it's quite on the SolarWinds scale, but it's got to be close.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen how many enterprises, because this is a lot of enterprise usage on this, will be impacted by this long term. I think if you look at the version history, it goes back to 2021 on some of their versions on this software. And you know what, though, we don't have to sit here and wait. We may have some special guests that might be able to talk us through some of this and have a conversation about it here in a bit. So let's first go over to Robin Harris and let's hear what she has to say with her always brilliant words.
When we talk about risk within a company, particularly in the tech world, we talk about single points of failure. And we're usually talking about the point in a system where if something breaks, it goes wrong, it derails the entire system. And we usually think about systems like technology, but there's a single point of failure that most companies don't understand and they don't account for it. And that's single point of failure with a human resource, a person, an expert. A critical piece of your business sits with this one individual. I kid you not, you can have multi-billion-dollar companies. And what happens is you will have this one person that knows how to do this thing that's really critical. And they've been with the company for years. And all that knowledge is sitting inside their head. Or it's tribal knowledge. You've got these veterans, and this person knows this piece, and this person knows this piece, and this person knows this piece. And they're like a finely knit team. But there's this one piece This one piece that's sitting with this one person. It's not documented, or if you have documentation, it hasn't been updated and gosh knows when, and something happens. Such and such grandma passed away and they're out on bereavement at this critical time when this special thing is supposed to happen, and they're the only one who knows how to do it. They're the only one who has access to System X. They're the only one who knows the procedure or has the relationship or whatever. Single point of failure. And then when you talk to companies about cross-training or resolving that, usually what comes up is we don't have the resources to bring in someone else. In some instances, it makes perfect sense. So why isn't it documented? Why isn't the process documented? So when so-and-so has to be out on FMLA, they're out on sick, they're on their honeymoon 3 weeks, on their anniversary, whatever. The business doesn't get, put in jeopardy while that person is gone. And then it's even worse. It's even worse when the person just leaves. And not to be morbid, but it's been instances where the person passed away. Or the person says, hey, I hit the lottery, see ya. Or the person says, I don't want to play with you anymore, bye. Or you let them go because you don't understand how critical they are to your business. This is the ideal case for making sure. This is why we consider documentation a control. It is a control within your business that protects your business. You have to have your critical processes documented, and you have to have them up to date. And test them. Test them. Bring Joe from over here and see if he can execute and create the end result that you're expecting. It seems like a no-brainer, but I can't tell you, even the multi-billion-dollar companies miss that point. Now, a multi-billion-dollar company can sometimes recover from these types of mistakes. They have enough people and enough money to throw at the problem where they can run around like chickens with their heads cut off and just put all kinds of band-aids in place and just they can recover. But when you're a smaller enterprise, that might not be an option. Don't let a person be a single point of failure in your business operation. That's something you have to address proactively. You don't wait till the emergency to put the control in place. 3 ways to avoid a single point of failure when it comes to people knowledge. Document your processes. Critical processes need to be documented. Update your processes. Documenting it 5 years ago, so much has changed. And cross-train. It's really simple. It's really that easy.
I suppose from a contrition perspective, I'm going to go ahead and tell on myself because Robin Harris's single point of failure and process conversation and all that reminds me of a day about 12 years ago when I was sitting in a leadership meeting saying, do we even want to be a process-driven company? Right? Like I legitimately was making an argument we should just hire all rock stars and we'd never have to deal with all this process crap. And I look back and realize how stupid I was now, but I figured if I told on myself, maybe I'd gain some forgiveness from karma.
Everybody starts somewhere, right?
I suppose so. Well, listen, Robin Harris is brilliant. Single points of failure, especially as you start thinking through an incident response plan and thinking through that space when things are chaotic and it's not easy to do, can be really, 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 really challenging. And I think one of the things that we wanted to focus on today, Dom, is really just talking about incident response and talking about kind of what that looks like from people that have been there. So we've got some special guests on today. If you don't mind, go ahead and bring them up for us. John Murchison, MacKenzie Brown, it's great to have y'all here. I'm super excited about it. One of the things that I'll say is that Blackpoint Cyber and John and team have always been way better at what they do than they are at bragging about what they do. And I think that that's one of the things that's why this challenge coin means so very much to me. This is one that I did get from John personally, although I think he really wanted me to realize how large your hand has to be to hold a 5 inch or so challenge coin, whatever it may be. But yeah,
It's a
welcome
big
to the
one.
show, y'all. Tell us
Thanks
who
for the
you are and what
invite.
you do.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Kenzie, you go first.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like we should start slowly making the challenge coins like ridiculously large.
Like Flavor
Flavor
Flav sort
clock?
of challenge
Yeah,
coins.
Flavor Flav challenge.
We just
going.
ran
Oh, yeah.
into him. We just ran into
Yeah,
him in
we just
Detroit
saw
at
him.
the IndyCar race, actually.
What?
He was there.
Super casual running, nothing too cool. Hi, MacKenzie Brown. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I'm I don't know, John, like a month into the job, so I haven't run away yet. I think that's a really good sign so far. And of course, with all the new announcements going on, I'm even more excited. I come from the big, wide government country-sized world of Microsoft, specifically doing incident management for the DART team, detection and response team, before you ding that button.
Oh,
I heard you guys are dinging the button. So, but now it's called Microsoft's incident response team. I think that they renamed the whole thing. But yeah, I went through.
Mert
It's
now?
funny.
Mert?
Dart's better than Mert.
Defenders
Sure
for
is.
Defenders, Microsoft Defender, be something like that. I thought they would name it that way, but they have not yet. But yeah, so came from really the trenches. I love that we're talking about incident response, because I've seen some things. I hear like the helicopter sounds a lot when just hearing some of you guys talk about, the new MOVEit situation going on and the Barracuda stuff. So yep, I can hear those helicopter sounds and slowly twitching a bit, but that's not my first rodeo around hearing about web shells being dropped for persistence and how do we find it, and how easy it is to recompile a new one. But that was a very long intro. John, I will pass it off to you.
Solid. Just keep going. No.
Yeah.
I'm John Murchison. I'm a CEO founder, Blackpoint, and yeah, been in the game a while. I started as a network engineer, so my whole background was like Knox and building MPLS backbones and all that fun stuff. And then I ended up at the National Security Agency for 12 years. Kind of more on the collection side of the house, I would say. On the cyber, and I did a lot of joint work and with our brothers and sisters down in Langley as well. So that's my background. Is definitely on the tech side, practitioner side, but now I think focus mostly on business stuff, but still stay really heavy in the tech and product development. Honestly, that's my real passion, is on the product side.
Well, you guys are going to come and do a bunch of stuff at Beyond. So let's start with talking about Beyond, since it is Monday. What are we going to get to see from this team on the pre-day show? Help us give a little teaser. I'm going to force you to do that first.
Oh yeah,
Go for it,
pre-day.
Mackenzie.
Oh well, the pre-day. How much are we actually going to be doing on the pre-day? Are we doing the whole thing that we're normally doing for Blackpoint University?
Oh yeah. So no, I think we're doing. I think you're doing some IR stuff, right? With Clark, and then we're going to be doing kind of a. Do you remember the Black Cat presentation I gave at Right at Boom?
Yep.
Kind of a deep dive in like literally the tactics they're doing. These guys are interesting. They like to do a lot of honestly, hiding in plain sight, whether you're doing kind of cyber operations or human operations, right? In the human world, the equivalent would be what we'd call non-official cover, where you work for a business, you're also a spy in the nighttime. On the cyber side, I think that kind of corollary is using as little malware as possible, right? What does an IT guy do? He puts software on computers, puts data on computers, takes data off computers. I mean, that's pretty much what most hackers do. And so, we're going to talk about Black Hat Ransomware Group, because what they like to do is they like to use a lot of free IT tools, whether it's totally free, whether it's in a free trial, even, kind of paid. And I kind of went through a whole PowerPoint version of that, but just kind of sneak preview. We've recreated a lot of this stuff. And we're going to show that kind of how it looks like in real life from the kind of defender responder view.
Nice.
To stay left of boom and, never give Mackenzie's old world any work. That's our main job. We don't want it to get to like the Pulp Fiction, like murder cleanup scene, if that makes sense. And that's, to me,
Sure.
incident response. good movie, by the way.
Totally got the visual right there. Just so you
Yeah,
know.
I know the visual, like the trunk, everything. We get it. It's burned into your brainstem at that point. But no,
I mean, it's
definitely
really
gonna.
it's exciting
Yeah.
for the IR people to clean up the murders and draw out the outline. It's fun. It's fun for a minute. The other people
It's
aren't
weird.
having fun.
There's lawyers involved in both of them. Shocking.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
there
true.
definitely are.
Maybe not in the Pulp Fiction version. I don't know that
Yeah.
there's necessarily lawyers there. It's
Yeah, they got away with it. It was all good. But no, we're gonna show some real gameplay. We're gonna show some real gameplay. I think we're even gonna show.
That's awesome.
I know you guys just made a major announcement with CrowdStrike, great company, awesome
did.
tech, and
Oh, yeah.
I think we're even going to show that interplay. We're going to show some live CrowdStrike stuff working with our stuff.
That's awesome.
Where everyone wins. So yeah, we're going to be covering a bit of that stuff in the pre-day, and then
when this kind of goes
whatever
back to that
day after, post-day, first day.
Yeah,
We're gonna be giving away
post-day,
Ducati.
post pre-day.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whichever day the Ducati gets given away. I'm not sure. That's a fun one to talk about.
Yeah,
One of the things that we talked about just then is left of boom. And for everybody that's watching, we assume you understand that, but if not, let's go ahead and explain it. And so when you think about it, if you're looking at a timeline, it reads from left to right, right? And if you think about it, the boom is when we discover and detect that the explosion has happened, whether that's a ransomware event, whether that's a breach notification, whether that be, a system that's been denied access for us, whatever it may be. That's when the boom happens. Is that a fair definition for everybody here? Is what the boom is, MacKenzie or John?
I think so. I'll be honest.
Leave it to John.
Yeah, this one I'm a little. This one, I'm maybe just nerding out and splitting hairs, but I feel
that's great. That's what we're here for.
Did always define boom as like when an adversary lands in a network.
No,
if an airplane breaches your defense, your air defense zone, and you shoot it down, you stayed left of boom. He didn't accomplish his mission. So to me, the real definition of left of boom, it's that opportunity when a defender has an ability to stop his adversary from completing his objective. And in the cyber world, that would be a data theft, that would be a destructive, kind of continuity of operations attack, or like a ransomware. And so, left of boom to me is, and that's the whole point of MDR, right? You don't want to turn it into a cleanup operation. So, but I think from what I've seen, the vast majority of the industry defines boom as when a bad guy gets in your network. And I don't think that's actually accurate.
I agree with you.
I think we should just assume they're going to get in, and it's all about what do you do when they do.
I think that's probably the best point we've made on this show right now of people's understanding they need to know, right? It's for me, it's when the event becomes something that I have to report, when it becomes something that causes a continuity of operations challenge, to your point, John. And I think just because someone gets in, is that necessarily the breach? Well, no, it's the data being touched. It's the denial of service things that exist. It's a lot of those things that will really breach. It's mostly data being touched. But the point is that you're right. And I think when you say stages of boom too, when we talk about blast radius reduction, there's a lot to be said for that. And I used to have this conversation I had when I was at Iconic IT as the head of security, and it was called Live Compromised. And it was just this understanding that at any given time, one of my 170 technicians was likely compromised. I can't even imagine when you're thinking about Microsoft's surface area of number of humans. But then it comes down to, what can they do? How quickly can I find them? How quickly can I stop them? Can I stop them from touching anything sensitive? Can I make sure that data can't be taken out of this environment and be usable? There's so many different pieces in that come into limiting the blast radius impact of an incident. And a lot of that's usually before the boom, right? A lot of that work. Yeah. But MDR and managed, SOC SIM type solutions that come in there are really one of the only things you can do once the first step towards boom happens, right? Once that kill chain has become executed, I've gotten past an EDR with some methodology. There's thousands of ways to do it, right? Mm-hmm. How do I find that and start reacting to it and limiting the damage? And I think that's your definition of boom, is when that opportunity is missed, I suppose, is that point, right?
Yeah. And even if you had we had a case, right, a few weeks ago, there's always an issue with like consistency of agent deployments, whether it's people are trying to save money, or whether it's just, frankly, they just didn't realize they didn't have a device, or it was refreshed, there wasn't a good gold image, or it was an old gold image or something like that. We had an example. Someone gets in, patient 0. It was actually LV. It was Black Hat guys. Just again, we run into them all the time. And basically, we saw them trying to spread, doing their own thing. We knocked them out. We didn't have an agent on patient 0.
Do you send them a bottle of champagne every time you stop them at this point? John?
No, I don't want to poke the bear. They're pretty competent. It's only a matter of time. We have to win every time. They only have to win once. Uh, the uh, um, the but But what they did is they just stole data off like the one computer they had. We had no agent on. There's nothing we
Sure.
could do. But the reality is that was going to be an epic mass ransomware event, and it turned into a complete non-event. They actually really failed their mission. So that maybe there's like a baby boom, but it wasn't really a big one. And that's just a constant issue. Like you can't really take them out if you're not on the machine. It's pretty tricky, but
Yeah.
you can, even coming from a machine. And that's why it's so important as defenders to be the absolute best at lateral movement detection, and then everything that happens after that initial step, because that's what gives you insulation from, like, you take the MOVEit vulnerability. There's always going to be tons of these. The remote code execution techniques that give you a chance to get in the network, that's a different way than phishing. Okay, you get in. It's all about what you do after that, right? And the weakest time for an adversary is always when they're trying to figure out where they are, who they are, if they can move successfully. And if you brought that into the physical world, and let's say you're an intelligence officer and you did no prep work and you landed in a city and it was a high consequence one, like you not knowing where you are, where you should go, what neighborhood you should be in,
You'll be
not
found
be in,
quick.
like that's
Yeah.
a very dangerous situation. But that is the objective of any good adversary, is to put your adversary in the equivalent, the virtual equivalent of the combined arms dilemma. And that's what the kind of Marine Corps wrote the book on. And what you want it to be is like every move your adversary makes starts making their position slightly worse. And then that increases dwell time. And dwell time is an advantage when the adversary has increased dwell time to kind of figure out where they are and move. That increases the defender's advantage against them. And that's how you'd like to think. A lot of the physical world lessons learned from combat, like, apply directly to the virtual world, albeit a little bit more cerebrally. But that's how it works.
You know what's funny about that is when I took my practical network penetration tester exam last year in December, and I was going through the breaking from my external vulnerability where I got into the external website and I was pivoting. I probably tried 140 techniques to escalate. I probably tried 30 or 40 techniques to fumble around inside the network from a lateralization perspective. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking, this is unfair. Any good security team would have picked me up. Like, all the things I'm doing would not have been quiet. They would have been loud. They would have been found from a lateralization. And as I thought through it a little bit further, I realized, no, this is actually quite regular with where most people sit. They have tools that might alert to something. They saw my techniques. They didn't correlate that once I moved to another box, once I had those other things. And so I'll kind of kick this over to MacKenzie. You lived in this incident management space and living that. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about some of that chaos of when it goes really, really wrong. If you have any great examples of that from an incident management perspective.
Oof, when it goes wrong, like in my role, in my job, where I messed up, or the actual
Well, no
incident.
more when you're witnessing where failure exists. But if you wanted to tell on
Right.
yourself, I'm in. Like, it's totally fine.
Yeah, what are they gonna do?
It's
Fire me
gossip hour now.
No. From the incident management side and using some of these as great examples of what's going on today, the things that I wouldn't say go really, really wrong, but made our lives hell. What I say is, like, our director bought us all a lot of Chipotle because we're working throughout the weekend, and it's a whole lot of expensing of food getting delivered to our houses. This MOVEit thing this is absolutely, in my opinion, this is about to be like a major supply chain attack, if not some of the things on the Barracuda side, right? And if it brings us back to Solargate, even the Exchange 0 days, those were awful days for our team, weeks for our team, because you said earlier, you mentioned on the side, how many articles have been released already since this MOVEit? Like, what did you say? How many?
Yeah, it's
70
like 89
so?
plus another 36 on Clop, so something like 130.
That's exhausting for an end user or some sort of IT services manager or a network manager to be able to say, all right, let's consume this. Which one do we point to first? On the Microsoft side, obviously, if you're working with your organization, any security company, you're going to want to make sure you are simultaneously handling it internally and making sure you're not affected by it and you're pushing out the patch and creating new detections for your detection mechanisms and putting them into products. And this is the big wide world of Microsoft, releasing it to the product teams and getting everything tuned as fast as possible. And then you're building out a blog, so you're finding the one person that can probably write on your team, and then creating IOCs, creating detections, putting it all out there. And you have to do that in under 48 hours without a doubt. And during that time, we are sitting there basically filtering calls, both SolarGate, both Exchange 0 days, and every single one after the fact for Exchange. And I think when things fail was I'll take the Exchange 0 days as a great example. We would talk to our customers about it. We would proactively educate them after the fact. We tell them how bad it was, specifically on the web shells. Then we teach them about web shells and what, suspicious IIS process being run, like what to do with that alert. And then we would do investigations. And in that incident management role, lo and behold, it's those types of CVEs that are getting exploited all over again. And they've already had a patch out there for 6 months to a year. And so I wish that we could kind of change the conversation around like, where do things fail during these investigations versus the aftermath when there's so many people affected by the same thing, but yet, thank God for responders, where job security is very strong. We're seeing the same thing still being exploited. Yeah. And what's scary about the Klopp gang here, they're probably still pissed because they got some of their homies in prison right now, but I do think that what's scary about this is they like barely turned the doorknob and they're like, oh, the door's unlocked. That's awesome. Or we know how to get through this specific door. And then they went in, they looked a little bit around, they see what they could do. And they know this works. They know their technique and their tactics are working. And they're going to step back and they're going to continue to aggregate all that information on many targets over the course of the past few years because they're not stupid. They've seen this before. Exactly. They've done this before. And they also know, and what's scary about this, what they also know is web shells are a very powerful, easy to build type of tactic to come into play. And what are the detections for this? The IOCs are like human 2, human 1, something like that. We can update and put those detections in EDRs and AVs as fast as possible. But this comes down to purely behavioral and being able to pick up suspicious processes and other things going into play. And then especially when all those 70 articles go live, what do we have now? We're going to have every other ransomware gang or just general nation state, APTs, anything going out there is going to start leveraging this. And we saw that a lot with, I will say from the SolarWinds, we kind of came up with, this is the golden SAML attack. Once that went live and we pushed out information on that, we're like, go clean up your ADFS. It's like, if that's possible. Don't store the password like on it. That would be bad. Once we were starting to put out information around it, all of a sudden we see it getting exploited over and over again. And what's scary is those don't often create or generate alerts of suspicious behavior. So you have to lock down very specific devices and reconfigure things. And it's a nightmare. And so if I was to place bets on MOVEit right now, I would say I would be sending my incident responder homies out in the field right now. Lots of Chipotle and lots of champagne.
Yeah.
Maybe they go good together.
I think one of the things you called out there that's so poignant, though, is, Dom, you saw this, right? You were in pro services, and even a year or 2 years after the first proxy not log on, proxy shell, proxy, right? Tell me a little bit about that. What did you see?
Oh, we found a shell in 2023. I won't say when, but yeah, we're still seeing proxy log on and proxy not log on type shells. A lot less than we used to, but we still see them, right? And we by the way, we still see Exchange 2003 from time to time. So it's the state of SMB. It is what it is. So it's, we migrate off of a lot of 2007 and 2010, and we see a lot of server 2008 that there's literally not patches anymore, right? But we also have seen that 2013, 2016 release continue to have that vulnerability. Or one case, which was really important, is they did patch it. Patch level was right, but it had already been exploited, and nobody went in to see if those IOCs were there.
The shell.
Right. So the access.
You guys have no idea how many times we saw this.
I think this is
after.
going
It's
to be
like,
a
we're good,
venting
we
session
patched.
now,
And it's like,
John.
hey, we got the web shell on there, guys. Not good. They're already in.
Like you did
You know,
half of a good job. Like you know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you guys
yeah,
want a
yeah,
cool
yeah.
story on the last exchange
do it.
exploit? You know, that's the problem with this exploit research. It's really good, but as soon as, you know, my whole theory on this, and the security research community might completely skewer me for this, but I think I have some logic behind it. You know, when you find a vulnerability or remote code execution technique in something that is where the IT professional has to take an active step to patch, you got to scream it for the rooftops. Just be ready for the follow-on exploits. There's almost always follow-on exploits when one technique is found. We've seen this over and over, whether it's iPhone or Exchange is perfect, or frankly, MOVEit, right? Isn't there another one that just kind of dropped?
30 minutes
If it's
ago,
like a
yeah.
vulnerability in like a cloud to agent comms and company has to patch, like it's very dangerous outing that stuff. Like if we had issues in the military world with detecting, you know, let's say it was like a stealth bomber, we knew in certain circumstances we had some flaws in the paint or the radar absorption or whatever the hell it was. Like we don't say, hey, we had this issue, but we fixed it, because everyone's like, well, what was that issue? And how'd that work? Because there's going to be more, right? And so, you know, I think there's a fine ethical line here. I mean, like we all know for the longest time we were combating just every red team tool that was released, and that's mostly what the bad guys are using. Now they're like to use like IT tools more and more and more. But back to the exchange thing. So, you know, MSP is our entire go-to-market that drives all of our product, all of our sales. We have no one selling kind of upmarket, but we do have upmarket customers, which means we do see a lot more nation state attacks than I think, you know, most others in our MSP space see. And we had a particular customer. They went to a conference. 11 folks exactly went to the conference. All 11 folks, Microsoft 365 intrusion, right? Luckily, you know, we have something to, you know, we're the only company right now doing live response on 365. We've been doing it for a year, and this was in the early days of launching it. It is. I know that's going to change. There's going to be more, like, but the thing is, there's a lot of lessons learned in how to do this right, and frankly, how to onboard customers right. You know, if you're in the days of like service accounts and things like that, like you're doing it all wrong. And it's, but I'm digressing. Like so saw that successful, you know, intrusion, caught it, stopped it, got rid of it. It was funny. We looked at that. I want to know something wild. The Chinese seem to love putting their cyber or malicious cyber research into like university papers. We monitor the heck out of those things. One of the things they love using is residential proxies, right? So that makes it look like, you know, you're
looks like grandma's
from
house,
like home internet, whatever, right? And it's a good hide in plain sight. And you know, we have a whole separate platform. We can't get this, you know, we take some raw data from like, you know, kind of the graph API, but then we have to enrich it all, determine like, is this easy VPN? Is this a residential proxy? What is it? But sometimes hackers are lazy with their user agent strings. And when you see like Python logging into 11 accounts at once, it's usually a pretty dead giveaway. It's probably not real, or it's very real. Like we got to stop this thing. But what was wild right after that, we saw, so this was a typical hybrid environment, right? You had a couple Exchange servers on-prem, and you still had some cloud, and they were moving towards the cloud stuff. Well, we saw a lateral movement. Again, this goes back to that behavior side, and I'll get into that in a second, but we saw a lateral movement from the Exchange server to a file server, right? And when you're really good at tradecraft and behavior detection, all the live off the land stuff, like, okay, we knew that was bad. We saw the scheduled tasks. We smoked the scheduled tasks. So their agent was cake. It was like a 5-minute response, whatever. But the next immediate question is, how on freaking earth did they get on that server? So the first thing we did is we used our vulnerability scanner, like it's patched. And then we all looked at each other and we went, and this is the same way we looked at each other when the Kaseya thing went down. And we went, that's a 0-day. That's a new one. We bet money there's a new exchange. That was 2 months before it came out public. And I'll be honest, the only reason we didn't break the news on this is, I won't name names, a forensics firm came in and ruined the forensics image, and so we couldn't string the whole thing. We weren't going to release it. But that one was wild. And then what they did is actually went after the MSP.
Was that when it was an authenticated one? This was the authenticated vulnerability, and they used the access they got from those 11 users?
Mixing these up. This is the very last one that was released. Don't ask me on the.
Anyway,
I don't fully remember.
I think that was authenticated. That's why they had to pop those.
Yeah, it might have been, and yeah, who knows? Maybe they used some of the crids they had, you know, from the other, you know, kind of, you know, cloud attack. But like the takeaway on this one is like, that was a nation state. That was AFNM, and like, you know, I think most people call them Ministry of State Security. Like if you look under the hood over in China. And so that was a legit nation state attack that did a 365 attack with the MFA bypass. They did a 0-day thrown that, and then they went after the MSP. And it was kind of a co-managed thing that wasn't a customer of ours. It's like, okay, you shouldn't have caught that. Like the best EDRs in the game were on all these machines. They didn't alert. It's not an issue. Like EDRs are great, but you have to realize, like, to me, like my take on this, if you look at like a professional hacking, elite hacking operation, you have some that are absolute pros at making your remote access toolkit, fuzzing, doing code execution, learning, finding vulnerabilities, code execution techniques, persistence, right? Which doesn't happen all the time, but it definitely happens a lot. Nation states love to do it. They're going to write something more like an AV EDR to catch a bad guy straight up, because they're the guys that wrote the tools. They're naturally inclined to catch tools. Then you have operators and analysts, and these guys tend to be a little bit more, they're the guys on the keys. They tend to have a much higher IT and networking and system administration background. So you use the tools you get from devs, and then you can spread. And so, I think if you ask like a, red teamer a lot of times, or, kind of a, elite tier analyst who should have like the operator skills, or most of a decent amount of them, and kind of target expertise, they're going to focus way more on when a bad guy gets in, when they're trying to test their creds. Like you mentioned, you failed 80 times or whatever, trying to lateral spread. And what it looks like in real life many times is like, you see a whole crap ton of it, admin $ share fails in a row. And that's immediately like, okay. And then you see both sides of it, and you see exactly what they're executing. And then you get the EDR alerts all plugged in too. It's orchestrated, but you can very, very quickly say, listen, I know they're going to get in. It might be a 0-day. This is why I think DMZs have to go away. We have to move to zero trust network access. Nothing should be listening on the outside of your damn environment. It's total old school. I built tons of them, but it's a total old school network design, if you ask me. And you're one code execution technique away that you can't predict from giving someone generally access to your network, because most people misconfigure DMZ firewall rules. They always do it wrong. And
that's how I got
it. So yeah,
PNPT,
and so for what it's worth,
exactly
the game is all about pinching the bad guy when he's at when we have an information asymmetry advantage against him. I mean, that is the game, and it hasn't frankly changed in 15 years, if you ask me. But the way that the commercial industry tech is kind of moved, it was so malware detection focused, it leaves you massively exposed when either you have really elite malware that you're not catching, or you just say, I'm going to play this game different and hide in plain sight. And so that's, for what it's worth, that's been our lessons learned. It's always been our thesis on how to catch bad guys too. But I hope that's slightly or moderately informative.
To keep this about incident response, and to keep this for value for our MSPs, I want to do this exercise now. What I'd love to do is each of us come up with some advice. If we were giving us advice 10 years ago of how we should be getting better and more prepared for incident response, incident management in our world as an MSP, can each of us come up with a point they'd like to say to their former selves to be way, way better off now? So I'll let y'all chew on that, but it's basically one piece of advice you'd give an MSP around incident response, so they'd be set up for success today. Who wants to go first?
Offline backups. No, I think just having it sounds so bad, but we would go, if I talk to a customer, regardless of the situation, if it's like live ransomware or something else, the first thing I would ask, or one of the top 5 things I would ask at least, is what is their backup strategy? It sounds so bad. It's basically admitting to failure, but they're so commonly misconfigured, out of date, connected and wide open anyway, so compromised by the bad guy. And it sounds like, oh, well, you've already failed. No, failure is responding to a lot of the business side, right? Data exfiltration and stuff. I think once you go through an incident, you realize that, I'd say 30-40% of incident response is actually investigation, and the rest is lawyers arguing in a room with other leaders, and you as the responder are sitting there getting half of the information. They're not going to tell you. I will say the worst things I've seen in investigations, we'll ask for an image so that we can start collecting and doing the forensic actual hunting, and then they'll just send us like weirdly really clean images of the computers because they've already wiped them. And I'm like, you're
No
paying
way.
you're paying for this,
Oh.
and it defeats the purpose. So I definitely say, and that's probably evidence preservation, because that's going to be huge too. But I
You're
always
cheating.
put it
That's
back
two
to
suggestions.
okay,
That's
wait,
two,
okay.
MacKenzie. You got two.
I have one
No,
more.
I'm good
but,
with it. But yeah, keep
Okay.
going. Let's get three. No, one more. I love it.
I think all of it comes down to, even on the business side, is asset inventory. Though, if you don't, there's
Preach
so
it.
many times, if you're bringing in a third party IR team, we are coming in completely blind to the environment. We don't know what's what. I mean,
I'm
know
only half
what,
blind half the time.
we don't know what's like. We don't know what's actually important. So if we're seeing a member server or some sort of SQL database or something that's popped, we're just going to say, hey, can we get an image of this? But we're also going to say, do you know what this is? Because it could immediately point or answer the question on data exfil, or potentially something worse. And also, if it's something that's regulated, like, those are the things you want to know, because those are the things you actually preserve, because you have to preserve them. So you're not going to delete any logs. You're not going to, wipe it and rebuild. You're not. Yeah. So those are my top.
Yeah. I mean,
ones.
those are fantastic, because what you really get to is the spirit of the data matters, right? The data matters in the beginning, the actual subject data, but also the data about what happened matters, right? If I had done what you were talking about and wiped my machines, that in our incident when we lost our millions of dollars, and I couldn't have proven that this was a earlier version of our evil attack methodologies, and there was no exfil, I would have never been able to prove it wasn't a breach. And so I was able to go through that with breach counsel. You gave me goosebumps on the 18 months of lawsuits that I sat through in the arguing between those attorneys.
Helicopter
in our
noises.
Incident. Yeah, that's exactly. I'm going to forever remember it that way. But the point is, great call outs around preserve the data. Don't do things to destroy stuff. If you're in incident response, you can definitely isolate it. You can definitely contain it, but don't destroy it. And then the other piece is have good backups, right? And that comes to a lot, because the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those come down to integrity and availability are both affected by good backups, right? I can prove that it's integritous, that it hasn't been modified, that the threat actor hasn't made some new reverse shell in this data set. And then I can also bring it back from that. So I can affect both of those with backups. And that's why it's actually such a good call out, is it covers both the I and A of CIA triad. Dom, what's your suggestion to an MSP to be better than they are today around incident response?
I've got two, but my first one is for vendors. All right.
MacKenzie set a bad
Please, for the love of God, stop telling these MSPs that you are 100% anything. Right? Like it.
True story.
I've met partners who got their hopes up on a certain tool, and it said that we're 100% protective, or you're cyber immune, or we will stop anything and everything. It's not true. Right? There is not a cyber tool.
Lie.
Like, if there was a cyber tool on the planet to stop 100%, we could wrap the show right now. Right? It's not a thing.
Yeah, we're done. We close the game. Shut the doors down.
Wipe that out of your marketing. Right? Go yell at your CMO about it. That's not allowed. But for MSPs, on the same token, never adopt a tech stack and assume you're protected. Right? The majority, I would say, of cybersecurity work is human work. Right? That alert in your EDR is an alert for a reason, right? If they didn't want you to look at it, they wouldn't have told you about it. So take a very human approach to how you secure, and understand that incidents can be tiny, right? It doesn't have to be a big, boom to be an incident, right? An alert in your EDR is an incident. That might be a small incident, right? Somebody clicked the wrong link, EDR took care of it, you do a quick investigation, you wrap it up, but it's an incident. You need to respond to it, document it, wrap it up. Do not ignore those alerts, and that'll go a long way. That's that noise John was talking about that they're making when they've gotten past that first layer.
Yeah, and I would extract from that a little bit more, which is you should have a healthy tracking process of incidents, right? You should be able to define what is an incident, what is an event, what should I actually do about these things, and I think that's what
gives the lawyers less to argue about
as well.
Yeah,
exactly. Back to MacKenzie's conversation. All right, I'll give my advice real quick, and we'll close it out.
Yeah. Sure, this has happened 10 times before.
Yeah, 27 times. We documented it. We know exactly what it was.
Wait, that's really bad legal advice.
That may be really bad legal advice. Yeah. We might don't take this as legal advice in your state or any state.
Document it and then fix it, we should say.
one of the things for me around incident response, especially as an MSP that's already going to know your systems, you're already going to know how things function with your customers, you're already going to have hopefully good asset inventories, hopefully good capabilities to assist an IR team. And so for me, it's about having a good incident management process in your organization. It kind of comes off what Dom was saying and also what MacKenzie was saying. And the only way you can do that is you start off with a plan. And just like Tyson says, right, or whoever it was, you always got a plan to get punched in the face. And I think that the point is that as we kept going through our incident process, and we got to where we had about 67 incidents across 20,000 endpoints in a 2-year period of time. Some of them were nothing, right? They were things we were just tracking because they popped up and went boop. But at the end of the day, we learned we sucked at it. And what we had to do was tabletop the failure. And I think that's the piece I would say now is if you're not tabletopping and walking through your incident response plan as an MSP, doing it from several lenses, right? You have that tactical, technical lens. That's that backdoors and breaches type model. You have the hearts and minds lens. That's getting people in your organization on the same page to understand why the hell they're even doing what they're doing. And then you step into this actual, do my processes and policies meet the expectation of what actually happens in real life? Can I honor them? Can I do them? Is there a break in the overall
Matt
chain?
just gave me another one.
What's
Don't write
that?
ridiculous policies that you cannot follow.
Exactly.
I see a lot of that too.
Tom wanted 3, got 3.
I saw a 2-person. I saw a single, person partner, a sole proprietor had a 2-person integrity rule on the break glass account. Like there's only one person.
Sure.
Like you can't be 2 people.
But he was schizophrenic, so that works.
So on Tuesdays at 10,
not to make light.
he's got 2-person integrity.
Yeah, it's a great call out. Listen, we've kind of picked this bone clean, but if you don't have an incident response plan at all, I'd start there. That'd be mine. But John, you got 2 minutes left. This is rapid fire. What would you give as advice
for
to
one?
somebody?
But I'm going to give you 3 because I think just to be complete, since
Crushing.
MacKenzie already cheated and was like 3.
It's a high value session.
1.
We gave like 12 if I do the math right.
Yeah. 1, you ideally live, so that helps you not get in this situation, but you need some platform or logging so that anytime a privileged account is used from one machine to another. That is one of the biggest issues you run into all the time, where they don't know which accounts are compromised. There could be multiple ones, and you need that track record. Obviously, in the MDR side, that should be live, and it should get you way ahead of the game. The second one of the biggest issues, and I don't want to speak for MacKenzie, is you come into a place and you don't have the ability to determine what was actually stolen. So file integrity monitoring on certain core, kind of whether it's EPHI, whatever. I don't know. You're a pro in that, MacKenzie. That is another one that I would really focus on. The other one, MacKenzie actually might argue with me on this one. It's just been my experience because we do kind of deal with it. So I see a big issue where it's immediately the victim is focusing on grabbing forensics images that are terabytes and terabytes, and they're overnighting them instead of step 1, deploying, software that doesn't require reboots, that can get you onto the endpoint computer so you can make sure you find the bad guys and kick them out to put yourself in a better position of power to negotiate, and then focus on the forensic stuff. What you don't want to do until your house is in order is get too sidetracked on nerding out on all the shit that happened. You need to protect your house first, get yourself in a position of a little bit more strength, and then we can go dig in. Those are the 3 areas I would say from my experience, I think are good, worthwhile.
I think I heard MacKenzie agreeing with you. I was really looking for a fight.
Good, thank God. She's a tough cookie. Go ahead, let's go. She will tell me. She'll call me up. She's like, "You're an idiot. You should have never recommended that."
I bet you could hear that cracking.
We could. It was very good. Yeah, it was very good. It really set the stage.
No, I would agree completely. I think from the evidence preservation side, it's really close to, in the scenario where the victim knew what was being hit and they knew it was a big deal. In a ransomware scenario, isolation, isolating a known good domain controller, just there would be ideal.
Yes.
And John's right, though. If you're going to work with any third-party incident response team, any of them out there, and they're coming in, they're going to deploy software. So if you had something ready to go, ready to deploy, and then had the ability to isolate, but also knew you had not forensics litigation strong, not digitally sound forensics, but you had logs, events, alerts, things for that system and continuous monitoring, that would definitely get you better control. So I'll I'll give him that.
I love that we got into the finer nuance of an argument over whether or not me installing an agent is going to disrupt the value of the forensics image, because we'll have to parse out the changes made by the EDR that's being deployed. So we got that deep. I think we're winning anyway on this conversation, because that's quite a
You don't want
nuanced
something that
argument.
requires a reboot. That's a big
Well, I understand
issue.
exactly why. Yeah, you don't want to lose you don't want to lose memory forensics that would go away, that are ephemeral on reboot, right? So you want the persistent information. But we've beat this to death. Let's go ahead and close this out. I can't thank y'all enough. If you want more of the nerdy bits and all this awesome security talk, come hang out with MacKenzie and John at Beyond next week. I'm going to be super excited.
And you.
Breaches with us.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We will be playing Backdoors and Breaches at some point as well. So, Dom, let's close us out. Thank y'all so very much, and much respect for all that you do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kenzie. Thanks, John. This has been a fantastic episode of the game. Again, this is our last episode before Pax8 Beyond. And I tell you to sign up, but I think it's genuinely too late at this point. But we hope to see you next week at Beyond. Jump on Pax8 Cloud on YouTube on Monday and Tuesday at 3 p.m. Mountain. If you can't make it to Beyond, Chris Farabach will be doing live coverage at the end of the day, kind of reviewing what went over. It's not the same as being there, but a ton of great information there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that jazz. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.